and all it took was that. The Wing Chun guy jabs the Shaolin dude in the face.
Whoa, our guy's throwing haymakers. Come on, Tai Chi Master, what are you doing?
Sooner or later in the fight game, you're gonna run into someone who's just better than you. Or at the very least, someone who has a style you're just not ready for. Let's see what happens, because these fights get very, very interesting. Just because you got more ways to win than your opponent, it doesn't mean that you're better than him. And though the MMA fighter in the blue gloves probably had a solid chance of getting a victory here if he secured a takedown, or even managed to get his kicking game going, he still gave this boxer way too much time and space on the feet to operate out of. And it didn't take his opponent long to find his opening, hammering him with a clean overhand that came so fast you could barely see the windup. And then for good measure, he finished him off with one more short punch as his opponent sat up. This was one mean finishing sequence, and proof of just how much damage a skilled boxer can do when he takes on a mixed martial artist who's way too hesitant for his own good. This next one is another example of the young hotshot who bit off way more than he could chew by taking on the trainer in a gym. And in this case, you could just tell immediately that this was not going to go well for the young guy. Once that first body shot landed, the whole gym knew that things were going to get more and more one-sided. Even when it seems like he had a strong position, the coach was able to drill him in the midsection and remind him exactly who the boss was. This was Boxing 101, folks, and by the end, the trainer had barely even broken a sweat, and you could tell that this young hotshot had his ego bruised a little bit. You know someone's bad if they fall over after the very first jab. And well, this guy managed to make a total fool of himself when he decided to try and represent Shaolin monkhood in the ring with an MMA fighter. This bout was contested under boxing rules, but who knows what the hell the Shaolin guy was trying to do. His weird movements and unorthodox techniques were not having the desired effect on the MMA fighter. And to make matters worse, he simply couldn't get out of the way of his opponent's shots. Zero defense, no meaningful offense, and he ended up taking some real punishment for his shortcomings. You want to know what happens when an incredibly sloppy kung fu guy comes up against a Tai Chi fighter who's somehow even worse? Well, you end up getting a fight like this one. To say this wasn't competitive would be a huge understatement. These two guys just looked to be in two different levels of comfort entirely. And even though the Kung Fu fighter's punches were terrible, the Tai Chi practitioner just didn't have an answer for them. And despite surviving and even going through a quick wardrobe change to try and warm into the contest, he was literally just a punching bag for some of the sloppiest martial arts techniques you'll ever see. This one seemed to be billed as a David versus Goliath kind of affair. But our David has some pretty formidable bulk of his own. That didn't help him though in his attempts to try and get away from this big dude's power and persistence. When you have a guy that big throwing shots in your direction, you're gonna need some solid defense, footwork, and maybe a little counterpunching of your own to deal with. And yet this guy just didn't have the technical skills or the endurance to handle the heat. He took his beating well and made it until the end of the third round. But that's just about the only positive he came away with here. If you walk into the great Zhu Xiaodong's gym and ask for a spar, you'd better adhere to the old hit as hard as you'd like to get hit mantra. Because if this was meant to be a friendly back and forth, this Canadian guy did not stick to his word. He went hell for leather on Xiaodong, trying to take the iconic fighter out. The problem? Well, Xiaodong was skilled enough to avoid most of the damage, and when he reset, he fired back with a point to prove. And when he began to unload, this Canadian was not so lucky. He fell down after the first barrage and proceeded to eat several more shots unanswered by Xiaodong, was satisfied he'd learned his lesson. Call it cruel, but if you step into another man's gym and try and take him out, expect to get paid back in a similar fashion if you fail. A self-described Bruce Lee imitator, who like most Bruce Lee imitators doesn't fight anything like Bruce Lee, got dragged into a kickboxing fight with this female fighter. And though they were clearly well matched at first, the fluidity of the female fighter's kicking game allowed her to slowly take over. After a while, and especially once the head guard came off, you could see that the pace was starting to affect the Bruce Lee wannabe. And sure enough, his movements became more and more labored, Now, this wasn't the type of washout that a lot of the clips on this video have been, but you can see that the dude's physical advantage only served him well for so long. How about a fun one next? As we take a trip back to 2017's truly bizarre collision of the worlds of boxing and mixed martial arts, orchestrated by the two biggest pay-per-view stars on the planet at the time, Conor McGregor and Floyd Mayweather. In order to build hype for their fight, Team McGregor brought in an old, out-of-shape, and unprepared former world champion, Paulie Malignaggi, and then pretty much ambushed him with an actual fight in the gym. In some ways, it was a genius tactic to get the people talking. And what we ended up getting was a series of clips that showed Conor looking sharp, tagging Paulie on multiple occasions, before actually dropping him to the canvas. Who knows what actually went down in the parts of the fight that weren't released, but this looked like a prime athlete taking on someone who was in no way ready for the onslaught that hit him. This next one is pretty hilarious. The Taekwondo guy is the one using all of his energy immediately in the pursuit of the KO. And yet, despite never breaking for a single second to catch his breath, he still couldn't find his opponent's chin. Furthermore, his boxing defense was just not there. And when he ate a clean shot directly to the chin after running into a counter, he fell to the ground, although it was probably some combo of damage and exhaustion that got him. There was just way too much energy being wasted on stupid movements from this guy. And though we hate to say it, he probably deserved to get put out like this. Who knows? Maybe he'll learn a lesson from it. Don't mess around with these Muay Thai guys, because if you step into their world and challenge them to a fight, they're liable to beat you senseless without thinking twice. In this case, when this fighter challenged the coach in this Muay Thai gym, he probably thought he was doing pretty well at first. The coach was sitting back, letting him shoot his shot, but then when he was satisfied he'd made enough reads, he turned up the heat on his opponent with a wave of extremely brutal shots, culminating in a series of kicks that had this dude slouched over on the side of the ring, utterly beaten. This was a punishing display from this Muay Thai guy. This one is just nasty. In one corner, you have a Chinese Taekwondo black belt who clearly seemed very comfortable with the idea of challenging this Muay Thai fighter. And in the early moments of this clash, he circled with the confidence of a guy who knew exactly what he was doing. The problem? He really didn't. And if the first punches that got through were a worrying sign, then the fact that he jumped straight into a big head kick and got KO'd seconds later shouldn't come as a major surprise. This was just a bad performance, unfortunately, and he really learned just how badly out of his depth he was, taking on a far more technical, astute striker. All things considered, he could have come out of this one with a far worse punishment. This is truly one of the most bizarre things we've ever seen. This Wing Chun guy came into this sparring session with glasses on. Yeah, you heard that. He was wearing glasses. That's insane. Now, it shouldn't be surprising to find out how this bout played out for him. His Jeet Kune Do opponent literally pressed the action on him and eventually broke him with a big shot that staggered him, a shot that landed directly on those spectacles. But yeah, this was not a competitive showcase. And as soon as that big shot landed, he basically signaled he was done. And to close things out, we take a look at what can happen when a boxer decides to try and stand in front of a kung fu guy and try to avoid his shots using a mixture of head movement and parrying with his gloves. Well, if the boxer is any good with his defense, it'll look something like this. The kung fu fighter's technique was just totally off, and it made things look way too easy for the boxer to anticipate and avoid. If this was a real fight, the countering opportunities would be there for him all day long. But in this instance, the kung fu practitioner simply walked off with a laugh of pure frustration when he realized his attempts to land were totally futile. This was a total mismatch. Boxing fundamentals are just far more intricate when it comes to the act of avoiding incoming punches. And that's what we saw here.